Max Keiser, tell us what's front and center on your plate. We're going to come back and launch the official interview here. Max Keiser, syndicated radio host, TV host, maxkeiser.com. A one-stop shop for all things financial crystal ball gazing. Good to have you here with us.
Hey, Alex. Great to be with you. And just continuing on the theme that we established a few months ago, just trying to pick the exact date of when you have this global fiat money collapse. I've said April of next year is the outside chance of that happening anytime between now and then. And just to try to figure out where the seismic shocks are in the system, what'll trigger the event. So I'm looking at a couple of different things. And I'll make another prediction for 2013. You keep asking me, is there any way to stop it? And I say, no, there's no way to stop this, because systems analysis tells me that when you complicate a system to the degree that this has been compromised and complicated, there's a 99.9% probability of a total, utter systemic collapse before April, and that's my thought. Now, following up on that, there is only one possible outcome as a result of that, and that's civil war. There's got to be a civil war. It's going to be a civil war in America, intergenerational. All the people under 30 are going to go to war with everybody who's 45 plus, who basically stole all their money, stole their country, stole their wealth, destroyed the arability and the viability of the soil, and that will be the civil war. There's only, if you have one, you're going to have the other, and that would come in 2013.
Max, I'm so speechless. I've got to interject something here. This is shaking me right now, because I know you wouldn't just say this and put your credibility on the line. You're really sure of this, and I hope you're wrong. That's all I can say.
Well, I'm putting my flag, planting my flag on this one, as I have done before with predictions previously. And there's no avoiding the collapse. There's no remedy to the collapse. The underlying chaos is too great. The 86% of all the trades in the New York Stock Exchange are computer to computer. That's true of exchanges all over the world. The algorithms that support all this trading are funded with 0% interest rates from the Fed. They can borrow money at zero. They can do anything they want with any amount of money that they want. And if they ever make a mistake, they get bailed out with more free money from the feds, and they keep adding layer and layer and layer of problems onto the system. We already had the flash crash in 2010. We had the entire evisceration of Knight Capital just a couple of weeks ago, 440 million in 45 minutes due to a spastic computer program.
Well, here's why you may be right. Undoubtedly, it's all a giant fraud and waiting to blow up, Max. But why are the Chinese pulling out of the U.S. stock market?
They're buying gold. They're buying this is going to be another surprise announcement, Gallup. They're going to come out before the end of the year and say that their gold holdings are not at roughly 1,000 tons, but they're closer to 2,000 tons. They may even be up toward 3,000 tons, which would put them right up with Germany. Number 2 biggest concentration of gold in the world is Germany with 3,000 tons, and then the U.S. with 8,000 tons. China, big surprise announcement coming this year. They're either going to probably double their gold to 2,000 tons. It'll shock the world. It'll put a whole nother wave of buying pressure on gold, which we still see is going to continue its climb to $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 an ounce. And China is a big part of that. As you mentioned, Soros is now back in gold in a big way. John Paulson, one of the biggest hedge fund managers in the world, is now 44% of his fund is entirely in gold bullion. That's billions of dollars. The hedge funds, the smart money, is always the first mover, and they get in there first. They know what's coming. They see the collapse. A lot of other hedge funds are closing business because the system is too chaotic. There's too treacherous out there. Funds are just pulling the plug.
Well, yeah. Well, that's what the Chinese said. They said Monday, of course, you just mentioned it earlier, they said this system doesn't work. It's not real. In fact, I had the article. I forget their exact statement, but we'll try to find it during the break, but they were like, this system is no longer, we can't gauge this. They basically said it wasn't real. Exactly what you're saying, Max.
Yeah, I know. They listen to my show.
Well, they listen to reality, I'm sure, and they probably do listen to you. We'll be right back with Max Keiser and your phone calls, and he's got a lot more to cover. Stay with us.
As I mentioned on the last show, I've done some more work looking into Japan. Japan is a very interesting country because they funded 20 years of stagnant economic development with their savings account. So people in Japan are almost forced to buy Japanese government bonds. But now, demographically, these people are retiring, so they have to sell to fund their retirement. So that means a guarantee upward move in interest rates. That could be the trigger that starts a global cascading effect in the entire. What got me started on this is because it just emerged this past week, Alex, that the second biggest buyer of U.S. Treasury debt now is no longer China. Number one, of course, is America. America is the biggest buyer of its own debt. But taking the second spot now is Japan. China is walking away from the table. Japan has always been under the Treasury of America's thumb. They'll do whatever America says. And now they are the number two biggest buyer of U.S. Treasury bonds. But that is extremely dangerous because their economy itself is a tinderbox, probably the weakest, most fragile economy in the world. But after the Fukushima disaster, after 20 years of the zombie economy and the zombie banks, but now they are supporting America. Japan, the zombie economy, is supporting the American economy. To give you an idea of how fragile the system is. China is walking away. What is China buying with the money that they have? Well, it's turned out that they are buying gold. My sources tell me that China, before the end of this year, will come out with an official statement announcing that they've upped their gold by over 1,000 tons.
Stay there. We're going to come right back with all things economic. I don't tell you this stuff to scare you. I think you're like me. I think you want to know the truth. The truth's always there anyways. And now things have really deteriorated. Fox News, AP, Reuters, they're all talking about global collapse. Banks prepared for collapse. Banks told prepare for collapse. We've been now told, and China has announced, the government's pulling out of the U.S. stock market, saying it's fraudulent. Just what Max has been saying. George Soros and others rushing in to buy gold, getting completely out of the market, even privately. They stopped managing people's money years ago. What does all of this signify? For those of us watching, the writing's on the wall. Massive war, total collapse. Can it be averted? Or, Max, when you say collapse on the outside by next April at the latest, are you saying that it will happen? Is there any way to avert it? What does the collapse look like? Max Keiser, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm saying that it's a 90% chance of collapse by next April, but it could happen at any time between now and April. The global economy, you have to look at it in terms of the way a systems analyst would look at any complicated system. Every time you add more to the system, the complexity doesn't rise in a linear fashion, it rises exponentially. So every time the Fed puts on more quantitative easing, every time investment banks bail out some other investment bank, every time more derivatives are released into the system, you don't go from, let's say, 700 trillion in notional value derivatives to 800 trillion in a linear way. You have to think of it in terms of this global quadrillion to 2 quadrillion derivative souffle being encumbered with exponentially more risk. This is classic systems analysis because we no longer have an economy of supply and demand, of output, of factories, of wages. We've left that world 40 years ago when we went off the gold standard in 1971. By the way, this is the 41st anniversary of the closing of the gold window on August 15th, 1971 by Richard Nixon. But all this time since then, we've been building in the complexity, building in the debt. And so now, between now and April of next year, is my call, you're going to have complete systemic collapse, much worse than in 2008. 2008 was just a precursor to what will be a complete and utter breakdown. And just so the game here is to try to pick where it starts, what's the trigger, and to study it in terms of how the economies rattle and roll as a result of this complete and utter systemic breakdown. As I mentioned, Japan, to me, seems like the weakest link in the chain. Once that goes, it's one of the top 3 economies in the world, the second biggest creditor behind the U.S. itself, the U.S. debt, and they just have a lot of awful demographic and economic trends going against them. So looking more locally, Alex, to follow up on a story you've been talking about for a few weeks, the fraud that is Facebook Groupon, and Zynga. I want to add something.
And you said on this show, let me just interrupt to give the number out, 800-259-9231, 800-259-9231. Calls coming up at the bottom of the hour. Max, I hate to toot your horn. I just want to point out, mainstream media gets it wrong most of the time beforehand because they're lying. They have an agenda. You keep getting it right, and our guests do, because it's, you know what's happening. But expanding on this, you said 6 months ago, well before this, you said Facebook was going to be a giant pump and dump. Everybody who knew what was going on knew that. And now they get away with this, but Martha Stewart goes to jail. Go ahead.
Right. It's a pump and dump scandal, and which is, you'd see on Wall Street 20 years ago on the penny stock firms. You know, they're very famous companies back then who were big in the penny stock, and they would call people up on the phone and get them to buy stock while they themselves were selling the stock. And then suddenly there were no more sellers and the stock would collapse and the insiders made out like bandits. Now, this is the first time we've seen it operated on this huge scale. Facebook was a $104 billion public offering. Barack Obama had his arm around Mark Zuckerberg. He was involved in this pump and dump. They go public at $104 billion, and they're now down 50% from the IPO price, 60 or 70% from the high just touched after the IPO price. And you've got two other stocks I want to talk about, Zynga and Groupon. Groupon is a stock that went public at 20, traded near 30, is now at 5. And Zynga is down 60 or 70, 80% as well. What all these three companies have in common, this is a dimension that hasn't been touched on a lot, is that they all share a common auditor, Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young is one of the biggest auditors in America. They are crooked. They are as crooked as Wall Street. They are as crooked as the fund managers. They are as crooked as the rating agencies. They are as crooked as these foreign bankers. And explain how this works. It's not just that they're crooked and cook the books. Only certain groups like Arthur Andersen and others who are politically connected with Justice Department people in a revolving door, only you go to them, not for them to cook the books even really. That's on the surface. It's really a payoff to regulators who are in a revolving door to let you be above the law. Well, Arthur Andersen is one of the biggest accounting firms. They got caught up in Enron. Enron blew up, and Arthur Andersen disappeared. There were 10 or so big firms at one point. I think we're down to 4
But
now.
am I correct in what I said?
Ernst & Young is not necessarily hired to cook the books because the system is so corrupt that there is no genuine, generally accepted accounting principles worth anything anymore. Ernst & Young, they cover these three companies that I just mentioned. They have just lost, in total, these three companies alone, the market caps have dropped by $62 billion in the past just few months since going public. And just to give you an idea what Ernst & Young does, or these big accounting firms do, I had an experience myself when I was CEO of a company in Los Angeles. We had one of these big accounting firms come in, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And the trick is basically, it depends on what they call revenue. In the case of Zynga, that they sell virtual tractors, and they sell virtual raspberries as part of Farmville, which is a game on Facebook. Ernst & Young would count the virtual money as real money. So that was the fraud that they were committing. In the case of the company I was involved with, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they were identifying losses as revenue. We had $2 million in losses. They put in the filing for the IPO of Bear Stearns, $2 million in revenues. And according to their formula, that was the revenues of the company, even though they were the losses of the company. But they didn't get in trouble after that, because the accounting rules in America, just like all the banking rules and all the political rules and all the special interest rules and all the abrogation of all the civil rights and all the constitutional rules, are now in the hands of the lunatics running this asylum. They're the ones, Ernst & Young can say that losses equal revenues, and therefore the company is worth $100 billion. Then it goes to the public market, and within 3 months we know, wait a minute,
sure,
the company's not worth $5.
Sure, Max, stay there. When we come back, I want to get your take on this then. All right, we're going back to Max Keiser because I want to ask him what the collapse he's predicting will look like. I mean, he's saying worse than '08, and that was a heart attack in the financial system orchestrated to hold us hostage and bring in control. How bad will this one be? Because Paulson, the Secretary of the Treasury, threatened martial law, and we first reported that with a congressman on the show who heard it in closed committee, and people thought I made it up, and a week later it was big national news. We got no credit, of course. And it's not that that even matters. I'm just tired of people doubting it when I have a congressman on or I have somebody interesting on, and people just can't believe it was even real. And I had like Willie Nelson on, and I've seen people don't believe I had Christopher Walken on yesterday. I mean, they don't believe that the truth has been successful. They just can't get it through their heads. They're playing games with themselves, not us that are awake. I got to ask you, Max Keiser, what then does a collapse look like? I mean, you're going out there big time, and I find it chilling because I respect your analysis. When you say collapse, some people then say that means road warrior, bands of motorcycles feeding on people. Well, crime rates are already exploding. There are a lot of towns where there are no police. Or if there are, they're there to make sure you don't have guns, or they are the gangs. So we're starting to see some Chicago, most dangerous city in the world now. But obviously, by collapse, you don't mean full road warrior collapse, or how bad could it get?
Well, first of all, before I get into that, I wanted to touch on some news here about the extent to which this fraud has perpetrated itself throughout the economy and why people are going to continue to be outraged and why that anger is building. Remember, John Corzine, former head of Goldman Sachs, former governor of New Jersey, he was caught when he moved over to MF Global stealing $1.2 billion. We talked about it on your show before. Now, he is basically allowed to go scot-free. There's no penalty at all for John Corzine. His defense is that the money vaporized. He has no idea where it went, and he just can't seem to be able to generate any evidence of its whereabouts that it ever existed or where it went. That's the kind of outrageous statement coming from a former governor, former head of Goldman Sachs, former head of MF Global, that gets under people's skin. And they say, wait a minute, this guy is part of a racket. The racket of the rating agencies, the fund managers, Wall Street, the auditors, as we just talked about, the media, CNBC. And it's a mafia-style racket. They're practicing racketeering, and they are stealing wholesale our wealth and, by proxy, our country. At some point, there is a breaking point, and the most victimized group in America will be the new generation that wakes up one day and finds gasoline at $15 a gallon, a bag of groceries for $300, and no way to get to work because the roads are completely in disrepair, and on and on and on. And those people will have no recourse whatsoever but to take back their country by any means necessary. It's not a big leap of faith here. This is just a logical progression of
That's
what
right.
happens.
And the bankers are gearing up with 1.4 billion plus rounds of ammo, checkpoints, giant armored tanks, vehicles, admitting they're going to put the army on the street. What's the army going to do when their wife can't, with their paycheck, pay for groceries, or mama's thrown out on the street? I mean, what are these bankers thinking?
Well, when you say, will it be like road warriors? It could be like, a soft gulag. And what I mean by that would be, on one hand, you've got this massive private prison industry that's growing one of the fastest growing industries in America is private prisons. Corrections Corps of America hitting new all-time highs on their stock. We talked about it recently.
And she'll put all the people in the new FEMA camps where they're there for petty reasons, making things, further driving down wages.
Right, and prison labor, since we talked last time, has come out that factory owners in America are complaining to the Chamber of Commerce because the prison labor now, which works for 80 to 90 cents a day, is becoming such a big component of the American labor force that the only way you can get a job in America now is to go to prison, to find yourself in prison. And so the manufacturers, the factories in America, they don't have anybody to hire because the people...
Yeah, and look at the crime wave in France, the riots, the crime wave in Greece, and they've disarmed most of the people, so the criminals are just robbing, and it says the police can't help. Yeah, because it turns out the cops are the ones robbing a lot of people. I mean, this can only go on so long.
All right, so my idea of the soft gulag is, first of all, you have the hard gulag, which are the prisons and the camps, and we see that being telegraphed in the stock market already because the capitalization of those companies is moving aggressively higher because they know that they're about to get 20, 30, 40, 50 million new inmates, and that's incredibly profitable. They get huge tax abatements. They own the restaurants and the hotels near the prisons, so people go visit their family in prison. They eat in the restaurants. They stay in the hotels. You lose your voting rights. It's a fantastic money center. But the soft gulag, we saw that last week with the introduction of face deals. You know, these new Facebook cameras in retail shops that are geared to face recognition.
And you get discounts by giving up your liberties and freedoms, but that's only up front. Later, everyone will have to do it to buy and sell.
Right. So, in other words, you give up your liberties and freedoms for a deal on some Chinese-made garbage. So you get 20 cents off, and you'll allow Facebook to essentially keep you in check, keep you in line. Whenever you go into a mall or a shopping environment, and of course they'll hook it up to the grid, which includes every camera out there, you will be buzzed on your cell phone whenever you stray off the path. If you stray toward a retailing outlet that they don't want you to go to, or it doesn't have the deal that they want you to look at, you'll get buzzed, you'll get phoned, you'll start.
Yeah, this is how they control markets. We've got to go to calls because I promised to, but new documents, Big Sis lied about canceling mobile body scanner program. They're now rolling out they have the Army doing this. We have footage on local news from New York where they make you and your family drive under a high-powered X-ray machine that shoots through metal, more powerful than a chest X-ray, and they're still rolling it out. New documents, Big Sis lied about canceling mobile body scanner program. Homeland Security claimed it had dropped the plans in an early stage, and we've got the local newscast showing the idiot police and military standing out there under high-powered, guys, show people this article, it's incredible, under giant high-powered X-ray machines that shoot through your car and your truck. I mean, this is suicide. I mean, these globalists are just setting up a system of total war against everybody with the GMO food, the radiation, the mass death. We are run by lunatics.
Right, the soft gulag concept is coming into focus. And Facebook, by the way, also is introducing online gambling in the UK with British pounds. So that, remember, I call it the Gulag Casino, which is people will give up their liberties also for a chance to gamble online. Of course, they hold out these enormous, mega, multi-million-dollar pots of money. That
all fake dreams, all manipulating. The people going to the private prison to visit their family don't even know the restaurants, gas stations, hotels are owned by the big mega bank that owns that consortium that actually shipped the drugs in, that their son or daughter got caught using. The troops grow the opium, total black op murder, massive record suicide by the troops, cancer viruses being injected in us. Total insanity. Again, that's the type of collapse you're talking about. Let's go to Roy in Montana. Roy, you're on the air with Max Keiser.
Well, thanks for taking my call, Brother Alex. Mr. Keiser, good to talk to you. My question is, I can't really afford gold, and obviously it's going to go way up. Do you think silver would be a good investment for somebody who can't afford gold, or do you just, at this point, just invest in...
You're talking to Mr. Silver right now, Max.
Yeah, silver, of course, they call it the poor man's gold. It's basically the same thing as owning gold. It'll operate the same thing. You know, gold and silver now, more and more, are being considered a currency. The commodity, at the CME in Chicago, the Commodity Mercantile Exchange, just announced today that they are accepting gold as collateral. That means for the first time now, these commodity futures operations who are part of the banking system, they are so distrustful of the banks themselves that they are violating this idea that gold is somehow not a money. They're saying now gold is a currency. We will take gold as collateral. So gold is seeping its way into the economy. It's being monetized slowly but surely. It is the only thing that's going to be left standing. 5,000 years of history will tell you that. Silver is just as good as gold in this environment. If you don't want to buy pure silver, you can buy junk silver, which is 90% silver, you know, the 1964 or previous.
Everybody knows what those coins are. And when all this paper fully goes down, people are going to still be transacting. It's going to be whiskey, cigarettes, silver, gold, bullets, firearms, food, people that know how to fix things, trades. I mean, that's where it's at.
Yeah, well, Stacy, my fiance, soon-to-be wife, you know, she has thousands of these miniature bottles of whiskey from the airplanes that she's going to use as currency, she says.
By the way, Max, yeah, I've got a bunch of whiskey and stuff. Obviously not drinking it, but I'm joking. But I do have a bunch of whiskey and stuff. I mean, I know that there's a good chance all this is going to happen. I hope it doesn't. But, sir, I hope that answers your question.
It does, and one quick follow-up. What would that do with a person with a mortgage? I mean, if the dollar tanks and, you owe your mortgage in dollars, I mean, how does that affect the average homeowner?
Well, sometimes, Max, you answer it. Go ahead.
Well, theoretically, you inflate the mortgage value away, and it's quote-unquote good for the homeowner. But I think we're in an environment where there's so much economic dislocation and there's so many other variables at play here that it's not worth it in that sense. But you mean your point is well taken. It's a good point, but there are other things to consider. And real estate as a class of investment is problematic for a number of reasons. You have the society breaking down. You don't know, different neighborhoods today could suddenly become war zones next week. There's a lot of things happening. But your point is well taken. It's a good point, and I can't, say it's not a good point.
All right, thank you so much, sir. Let's go to Jay in Texas. You're on the air, Jay.
Hey, how you doing, Max? Hey, there's an article out in Veterans Today about foreign cash disqualifies Romney from presidential bid. Something about him being over in Israel and Italy or London. Do you know anything about that? And
I haven't seen that particular article. Romney, of course, is problematic for a number of different reasons. The whole Bain Capital affiliation and everything that goes on there. I don't understand why people would want to look at a guy who said his tax rate for the past 5 years is averaging about 13%. So clearly he's not in the same country that we are living in. He lives in some other country. He's a foreigner.
He lives in global country where the globalists are all above the law.
You can't really consider him to be an American. He doesn't, he pays taxes like he lives in the Cayman Islands. So go to the Cayman Islands and leave us alone.
In California, you're on the air worldwide.
Nice to talk to you, AJ. Remember, apathy is treason, my brother. My question for Max Keiser is, I don't hear anybody speaking about commercial real estate and the fact that you can only claim a loss on your business for 5 years before you have to declare bankruptcy. And I believe that is going to be one of the trigger mechanisms for the next collapse, because housing real estate was the bubble that popped the first time. And so I wanted to know what you thought about that, Max.
Well, all I can say is that I would agree with you. Okay, what you're saying is absolutely correct. The commercial real estate sector is kind of huge bubble proportions, just like the student loan sector is a huge $1 trillion plus bubble ready to burst as well. So there's still big bubbles yet to burst.
Here in California, everywhere I look, strip malls they have one business in 10 units, and every single one of them has a for rent sign, for sale sign. And they've been sitting for years. I have friends
let me jump in here. So think that through for a second. So in other words, you got this commercial real estate that's vacant, that's not generating any income. It's backed by bonds, collateralized bonds of some nature, mortgage collateralized bonds, which have been sold back and forth amongst banks. And those banks, when they sell those back and forth to each other, they value them for 100 cents on the dollar. None of the banks yet have said, wait a minute, the strip malls are empty. Those bonds are not worth 100 cents on the dollar. They're worth only 5 cents on the dollar. No one has done that yet. They keep trading them back and forth for fees, and they're allowed to do that because they do it really off balance sheet. They do it on the dark exchange. They do it outside of the regulator's eyes. And so as a result, you have this building Mount Vesuvius of bad debt that's building on the balance sheets of these banks. JP Morgan, classic example, $90 trillion worth of derivatives, trillions of dollars worth of bad commercial real estate debt, and it's not being exposed because they...
Well said. Thank you, Logan. Got to jump. Terry in Canada, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Alex, Max, thank you very much, guys. I was first introduced to Max, Mike Maloney. And when he air guitared the Sex Pistols, he had me hooked. So my question is, Bank of Canada governor is Mark Carney. He does double duty at the Bank of International Settlements. So my exact question is the Bank of Canada buying gold? And once this financial collapse happens, where does Canada fit into it all, being the biggest trader with the U.S.?
Well, Carney's an interesting case because, of course, just 6 months ago, Jamie Dimon, CEO JP Morgan, was lecturing Carney on why he needs to reduce his minimum capital reserve requirements in that country, because doesn't he know that selling more derivatives is in the best interest of all the bankers around the world? Carney said, get lost, punk. And for that reason, you have to give them big kudos. They went through a huge banking crisis in the early 90s. They recapitalized everything. The Canadian banks are basically nationalized. They're not, so they have a much more strict oversight.
They didn't get rid of their Glass-Steagall because they'd done that previously and got into trouble with it. Great points. We're going to come back, do 5 more minutes with Max Keiser of MaxKeiser.com. Again, if you're just tuned in, I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com. No, we're not dry, old, fake left-wing media regurgitating fables. We're not old, dry, right-wing media regurgitating old fables. We're looking for real reality and freedom in our time. I hope Max Keiser's wrong. He says it's going to happen in the next 6-7 months. By next April, total collapse. I hope he's wrong, but there's a good chance he's going to be right. John in Indiana, you're on the air with our guest, Max Keiser.
Yeah. Hey, Max, Alex, good to talk to you guys. I always enjoy listening to Max and you too, Alex. Just kind of wanted to tell you a little bit going on here. I'm about 2 hours outside of Chicago, close to a little place called Gary, Indiana. I don't know if you guys know about it, but it's a cesspit, basically, just rampant crime. But what they're doing here is they've opened up. They're opening up, I should say, several churches in and around the area to confiscate guns. So you can bring your guns in and basically get a $15, $25 Walmart gift card. So, and this just happened Wednesday. I just heard it on the radio here. The local radio station was just broadcasting it here. Yeah, like I said, a couple of days ago.
Give us your take on that, Max.
Walmart is the company store on the plantation. Every dollar you save at Walmart, you destroy $1.50 in wages. If you shop at Walmart, you're putting yourself into a wageless prison environment. It's as simple as that.
Same thing with Target, though. They're all the same.
Yeah, okay. But Walmart is the biggest employer.
No, I mean, it wrote the book, but it's now even being slave-marted out worse by Amazon.
Possibly. But in other words, the retailing environment...
Race to the bottom.
Yeah, it's okay, the race to the bottom. I mean, if you want to segue into a discussion about guns, I mean, that's a different discussion.
Yeah, but I mean, I was interrupting. Give us, in closing, your take on what's happening to retail.
Well, no, it's the race to the bottom. I was trying to come up with a good metaphor for this this transition to this total collapse state. And you see it in nature all the time, Alex. The transition in these system dynamics when there's a shift. When you have water, for example, retains a lot of heat, and then suddenly it only takes 1 degree to go from water to vapor. Okay, that's a phase shift. And that's what I'm talking about. The heat, the water, the system is heating up with systems breakdown. And once we get that 1 final degree shift in complexity and outrage, you have a phase shift from water to steam. And steam, compared to water, is extremely, unstable.
Yes.
And that's the society that we're heading for in 2013, something extremely unstable.
So when you say collapse, you mean lots of instability, crazy stuff going on, and the globalists know this shift's happening, so they want to flip it like judo and take all that rage and use it for them to take over. But you're saying you don't see things going well for them, or will they stay in control?
They've got all that. I think they're in good shape, Alex.
We're going to have you back up very soon. Thank you so much, Max. Ask yourselves, what are you doing in this time of great challenge? What are you doing to unlock minds?